In this lesson, we'll add textures to the mouth interior by focusing on the tongue and the teeth. So let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so we want to start focusing on the mouth interior now. It's starting to kind of stick out compared to all of the additional textures that we've added just on the entire form of our concept. And so let's go ahead and zoom in here. And we'd like to focus on just the tongue first, adding some more texture to it. Right now it feels very flat and smooth. And so we want to kind of give him some very prominent kind of rugged taste buds just in his mouth. And from there, I'd like to focus on the teeth. I ended the previous lesson by talking about, despite the fact that his teeth are very jagged and just very aggressive looking, they also feel very clean. And so we'd like to basically rough them up a bit, just make them feel just a lot more weathered to really complement just his entire form, all of these other very weathered organic elements that we've basically incorporated. So let's go ahead and bring up our first texture that we're going to pull from in applying it to our tongue here. So this is kind of a stony pebbled kind of texture that I think will work very nicely. I kind of imagine when I saw this texture, I imagined these little pebbles as being like the taste buds, the very rough, coarse taste buds that make up our forest creature's tongue. So I'm just going to go ahead and grab my clone stamp tool, and we're just going to use a soft round brush. All right. And before we begin painting that in, I'm going to come over to where I have our new group, which I've titled Mouth. We're still in our texture blocking group. And we're just going to go ahead and make a new layer within this group. And I'm going to go ahead and set this layer to Overlay. Overlay or Soft Light, both of which generally do a pretty good job when it comes to painting in these textures from one image to another. So we'll come over here to our stone pebbled texture, and I'm just going to hold down Alt and Sample. Just kind of right there in the center, we can kind of see a preview of that. And I'm just kind of starting to paint in that texture, and I think it works very nicely. Kind of gives his tongue a very rough, almost kind of scaly looking appearance. And if we're curious, we could always kind of see what Soft Light does. And we could actually try Soft Light. I actually kind of like how it gives us a little bit more of that variation that we have in that texture itself. So I've mentioned this before in the course, don't think that you have to use just one blend mode. Experiment, kind of play around, see what works, what doesn't work as you paint these textures. We could even see what hard light looks like, but I don't think that's really going to give us the desired result. That's just way too contrasty. But I kind of like Soft Light. I think either Soft Light or Overlay would work nicely for the tongue. Now, one thing I would like to do, now that I've kind of painted in that texture, let's go ahead and try an adjustment layer again. And of course, I want to clip it to that layer that we've applied the texture on. May want to increase the brightness just a little bit there. Maybe even push the contrast up just slightly. And then I'm going to jump back down to that layer. I'm going to grab my brush tool, and using black, I'm just using a hard round brush set to pressure sensitivity. I'm going to jump to that mask for that adjustment layer. Just kind of painting back on that mask right there, kind of revealing some of that darker value that we had. Obviously, the further back his tongue recedes into his mouth, a lot less light is going to reach. Just kind of painting that. Okay, so I like how that's looking. Let's go ahead and kind of focus on the teeth now. I'm going to make a new layer, and for the time being, we'll go ahead and try Overlay. I usually like to start out just with Overlay as kind of my go-to blend mode for painting these textures. And we're going to go ahead and try our concrete, our cracked concrete. If you recall, we used this texture as we were basically painting in that initial base skin, and I thought it worked nicely. And I think the cracks that we have in here will work well on the teeth. Again, we want to rough up his teeth. They feel just overly clean. So we're going to grab our clone stamp tool once again. I'm just going to sample from right here in the center. And I think that's working very nicely. So just making his teeth feel just very weathered. Certainly a dentist's worst nightmare, what we are basically doing to his teeth. And we'll go ahead and hit these bottom teeth as well. And then we'll kind of get some of these teeth back in here that are receding back into his mouth. Let's go ahead and kind of zoom out, see how that's looking. I may want to go ahead and bring down the opacity just a little bit, not too much. I'm just kind of making that comparison there. I think that really did add a lot to his teeth. His mouth is starting to feel a little bit more unified with the rest of his body there. Let's go ahead and kind of focus on this kind of roof of the mouth back in there and add a little bit of texture into there. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is make another layer, just hitting this button down here at the bottom of our layers panel. And we're going to jump back to that coral that I really liked. We used that kind of right here on the upper and lower eyelids in the previous lesson. We actually also used it when we're kind of adding some of those just little interesting spots or blemishes on his skin when we were creating that base skin. And so I'm going to just pull from that again and kind of work in some of those similar kind of shapes into the upper roof of his tongue, just kind of giving some little spots up in there. So I'm going to go ahead and hold Alt and we'll sample just kind of from right in here. All right. And let's see what soft light does for us this time. So just kind of starting to paint that texture in. And I want to be careful to kind of continually sample so I'm not pulling from out here on the outer edges of that image. So just kind of giving a little bit of a just some spots back in there. Just kind of varying it up. We may want to lower the intensity or lower the opacity, if you will, down just a little bit. Kind of move that window out of the way there. And let's go ahead and make a quick comparison and just kind of see the changes that we've made in just a short amount of time. So this mouth now feels like it's just a lot more a part of the rest of his form. It feels like it sets into the rest of his body there a lot more nicely. So now that we've pretty well got all of our textures blocked in, we're ready to start kind of refining the overall image, just kind of moving around the entire image, doing a little painting here and there, a little bit of cloning here and there, using both our clone stamp and our healing brush tool. And we're just going to start now in the next lesson a process of just doing some overall refinement to our concept. So we're getting actually pretty close to adding in color, but again, we just kind of want to refine just some overall shadows, some highlights, and just textures. So stick around and we'll go ahead and start that in the next lesson.